Hello and welcome to this episode of Happy Baking. In this episode, I want to talk about one of my best hacks for beating a soggy bottom, featuring my all-time favorite pie pan alternative, cast iron skillets. Cast iron heats up quickly, evenly distributes heat, and retains heat beautifully. This means that using a good quality skillet can almost guarantee you a crisp golden bottom crust capable of passing the sturdy pie challenge. Lend me your eyes and ears and bring a few sticks of butter. Push that old pie plate aside, grab a skillet, and let me show you this magical path to pie success. In this episode, I'll be sharing 3 delicious pie recipes step by step. Plus, I'll share tons of tips and tricks to help you adapt your favorite pie recipes to a cast iron skillet so you can truly impress this holiday season. Let's get baking. Let's talk about some cast iron pie baking tips. For the most part, baking in a cast iron skillet is actually easier in a lot of ways than baking in many types of pie pans, but there are a few things you should know. First, consider the size of the pan. A standard pie pan is typically 9 inches or 23 centimeters in diameter, and up to 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters deep. Deep dish pie pans are anything over that 1.5 inch or 4 centimeters deep. If you want to adapt one of your favorite recipes to a cast iron skillet, it's important to check the size of the pan you're using. If your skillet is significantly wider and deeper than a standard pie pan, you may need to adjust your filling quantity and/or the total bake time to accommodate it. But the recipes in this episode are specifically formulated for an 8.5 inch, 22 centimeter skillet, which is typically the closest size of skillet available to a standard pie pan, because they are a tiny bit deeper, so we need a little bit less diameter. Next, let's talk crimpin. Cast iron pans typically have straight sides without a wide rim like some pie plates do. This rim on a pie plate is a great place for the edge of the crust to rest, providing a literal platform for decorations like crimps. But using a straight-sided pan doesn't mean you can't do a decorative crimp. It just becomes a slightly more advanced technique. Let's talk about getting the perfect bake on your skillet pie. First, determining doneness in fillings. The heat retention of cast iron really works in your favor with pies, especially the crust, ensuring that outer portion is browning evenly. However, heat retention in a pan also means that it will continue to hold heat for a significant period of time after being removed from the oven, longer than some other materials typically used for pie pans. It's especially important when using a cast iron skillet to consider whether the filling will be impacted significantly by carryover cooking. For example, custard fillings are much more sensitive. If a custard pie is overbaked, it can cause the custard to crack or become rubbery and unpleasant in texture. So it's important to allow for carryover cooking time even more than you would for a standard pie pan. Removing the pie from the oven when the custard looks set around the outside but still has a visible jiggle in the center is the sweet spot. Fruit fillings, on the other hand, are way more flexible. I tend to tell people that it's very hard to overbake fruit pies, particularly from a filling perspective. So you don't really have to be as precise with the doneness, and you're still likely to get a good sliceable piece of pie. Let's talk about how to get a perfectly brown crust. A skillet pie might be capable of browning on the base and sides well, but the crust can still struggle to get fully baked through without a little stint of par baking. You can end up with a darker line of underbaked dough, sort of between the filling and the crisp bottom crust. This can be pretty gummy to eat, unpleasant, not to mention it's technically unsafe to eat underbaked pie dough. All the pies in this episode require a round of par baking, and here's how to do it. We also have a full video on my channel that talks all about par baking in detail, so go check it out. On a lightly floured surface, I want to roll out the dough into a circle about 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters thick. To transfer the dough to the skillet, I like to roll it up around the rolling pin and then unfurl it into the skillet. I'm lifting the dough up around the edges and pressing it in to make sure it's fully touching both the sides and the base of the pan all the way around. I'll use scissors to trim away any excess dough, but I wanna leave about a 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter of excess all the way around the outside edge. Then I'll tuck this excess dough under, pressing it gently as I work so that it's touching the wall of the skillet where that seam is. I really wanna press it well. What this does is it gives us a little bit more heft and weight to the crust at the top. Also, folding the dough under itself is actually going to make that edge part even flakier. So when we cut into the pie, we're gonna see a really nice cross section with each slice. Once the dough is tucked under, you can crimp the crust as desired, or you can leave it as is. I call this a straight edge, and I think for this first pie, which is a cranberry ginger crumb, it has a crumb topping, so you're not really gonna see a lot of detail from any of the crimps anyway, because all that crumb topping is gonna be on top. So I'm just gonna leave a straight edge. Now I need to dock the crust with a fork all over. This is just gonna help steam release as the crust is baking to ensure that it doesn't puff up too much. And as you know, I like my crusts extra flaky, so they have a tendency to puff up lots. So I'll dock it all over the sides and the base of the pie pretty generously, just to make sure that there's lots of places for that steam to escape so that the crust stays nice and flat. Preheat the oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, 220 degrees Celsius, with an oven rack in the lower third of the oven. Now it's time to line it and fill it with some pie weights. I need a piece of parchment paper that is wider than the skillet, and then I want to crumple it up. Crumpling it up just makes it easier to fit into the pie pan really nice and easily. I'll press it into the skillet. Now I need to fill it all the way to the top with pie weights, and of course my pie weight of choice, pie beans. I'm gonna bake the skillet until the outside of the crust is just barely beginning to brown, about 15 to 17 minutes. Then I need to remove the parchment paper and pie weights and return the skillet to the oven until the lower portion of the crust appears dry and set, about 2 to 3 minutes more. Then it's important to cool that skillet and that crust completely before adding your filling. Let's talk about how to balance browning when you're baking in a cast iron skillet. Because these skillets are so good at retaining heat, you almost have to be more careful about over browning than risking a soggy bottom. In general, you're gonna notice that pies baked in a cast iron skillet will bake and brown more effectively and noticeably more efficiently. They may be properly baked closer to the lower end of bake time than the higher end of the time range. Remember that you can use the placement of your oven racks to your advantage. For example, my oven's heat source is at the bottom, so I tend to bake pies towards the bottom of the oven to help drive heat to the base. You can also adjust the rack if you fear your pie is over browning, or if it needs help browning in another area, like the edges or the surface. If you're concerned about over browning at any stage, you can always tent the entire pie or portions of the crust with foil to prevent it from continuing to brown for the remainder of bake time. This episode is brought to you by my friends at STAUB. As you know by this point in this episode, I love using cast iron for baking pies. It provides great heat retention and even cooking, which means no soggy bottoms on our pies. That's perfect for anyone participating in the Sturdy Pie Challenge. The 8.5-inch STAUB skillets can easily be swapped in for a pie plate or tin in most of my pie recipes, but I do recommend giving cooking pies in cast iron a try. I love that these skillets come in a snazzy array of colors. I've got cherry, sesame, and graphite here. Plus, the design with the handle and the helper handle makes maneuvering your pies in the oven a little bit easier. And when you're finished, STAUB's enameled cast iron can be cleaned with just soap and water, unlike traditional cast iron. Check out the skillets and more of STAUB's wonderful line of cast iron cookware at the link in the video description below. And now, back to baking these tasty pies. The first skillet pie we'll tackle is a juicy fruit pie, my ginger cranberry crumb pie. I think that cranberries are a seriously underappreciated pie fruit. Think of them as the rhubarb or sour cherries of the fall and winter. Cranberries are naturally high in pectin and can reliably produce a sliceable pie without any added thickener like cornstarch or tapioca. Orange juice and lots of spicy ginger, both in the filling and the crumb topping, is what makes this pie extra special, and it makes your house smell amazing while that pie is baking too. We will need 1 par-baked crust in a cast iron skillet for this recipe, and we're going to pre-cook our cranberry filling. I'm using frozen cranberries for this, but you don't even need to thaw them because we're going to be pre-cooking the filling. So that's another advantage if you happen to have cranberries in the freezer. Yes, I have super duper filled my pot, but this is gonna cook down quickly, especially because they're frozen berries. So to that, I'm gonna add some orange juice. I love the flavor combination of orange with cranberry. It really is such a complementary flavor. I'll add granulated sugar, a little bit of brown sugar, it's fine, ginger, cinnamon, and salt. It really will cook down so fast. The question is if I'll be able to stir it. Hey, listen, we've all been here where we thought the pot size was the right pot size, and it's not. But you know what? I'm not gonna dirty another pan. We're gonna make this work. Because this is happy baking, and doing dishes does not make me happy, but you know what does? Skillet pies. Now that I can actually stir it, I'm gonna cook it over medium heat, stirring pretty frequently until the cranberries begin to soften or break down, 12 to 15 minutes. Once I can visibly see that most of the cranberries have started to break down and burst, I can reduce the heat to low and continue to cook, stirring frequently until the mixture thickens slightly. This will take about 6 to 8 minutes. Most of the berries are gonna break down and become jammy, but there still may be some whole or chunky pieces inside. Okay, the filling is looking so good. It's thick, it's jammy. There's still a couple whole pieces of cranberry that I can see, which I just love. I love a little bit of texture still. So I now need to cool it down completely before I can put it into the pie pan. And to speed this up, I have my little surface area trick of pouring it onto a baking sheet or something flat. You could also use a casserole dish, something like that. And that increased surface area is going to help it cool down significantly quicker. I'm gonna let that cool completely, and while it's cooling, we can make the crumb topping. I love a buttery crumb topping on this pie because we've got such a tart filling. It gives a little sweetness, it gives a little texture. And I also find that crumb-topped fruit pies are always the first ones to go at any table. Like, people love that crumb streusel topping. It's just a favorite. And it's so, so easy to make. So to make it, we'll start with a medium bowl, and I'm gonna stir some all-purpose flour and some oats. One of my sort of secret ingredients for streusel is a small amount of whole wheat flour. Just trust me, it's delicious. Then I've got brown sugar, plenty of ground ginger, a little bit of cinnamon, some fine sea salt, and I'm just gonna mix those with my hands to combine evenly. Just to give a boost of that orange flavor, I'm also gonna add the zest of an orange to it. I'll mix in that orange zest just to make sure it's evenly incorporated. And then I'm gonna add the butter to it. You can use your hands or a pastry cutter to cut in the butter, and you just wanna mix it in until the mixture starts to form large, visible clumps, like crumb topping. And then there's just one more ingredient that makes this particular crumb topping extra special, which is some chopped candied ginger. And that's just gonna add that other layer of texture and spiciness. It's gonna be so, so good with the cranberries. And I'll just mix that in until it's evenly combined. I'm gonna clean things up and grab my crust, and then we can assemble our pie. I'm gonna spoon my cooled cranberry pie filling into my par-baked crust. Remember, the crust also needs to cool completely before we add it. We just want everything to be at the same temperature. Now I'm gonna put that crumble topping over the surface in a fairly even layer, but it's okay if some of the filling is visible. I sort of like sometimes having that visual cue of what's waiting underneath. I'll transfer this pie to a 375 Fahrenheit or 190 Celsius oven and bake until the crust and streusel are both deeply golden brown, about 40 to 45 minutes. And I know this is difficult, but with fruit pies, it is especially important to let it cool completely before slicing and serving the pie. But that also means that you can make this ahead of time and serve it when you're ready. Into the oven it goes. The next skillet pie we're going to make is my pumpkin brûlée pie. This pie is part classic, part unexpected. Taking cues from the deliciously rich dessert creme brulee, this pumpkin custard is made slightly creamy with the addition of mascarpone cheese. And after baking, we'll brûlée the top with a gorgeous layer of caramelized sugar. The contrast of textures between the flaky crust, the smooth custard filling, and the crackly sugar top makes for a truly incredible slice. Here is how to make it. Once again, you'll need 1 par-baked crust in a cast iron skillet. Then in a medium bowl, I'm going to whisk the ingredients together to combine. I like to start with the eggs and the brown sugar, granulated sugar, and vanilla. I'll whisk that until it's really well combined. I'm sort of looking for the sugar to start to look dissolved and the eggs to be really well whisked. Next, I'll add the pumpkin puree, ground cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and my favorite spice, or one of them, some nutmeg. Freshly grated, of course. And I'll also add some fine sea salt. I'm gonna whisk this until everything is really well combined. It's already smelling so good. That final special ingredient, the mascarpone cheese. I'll just dollop it in and then whisk it until it's well incorporated. My more classic pumpkin pie recipe has a little bit of heavy cream in it, and that's sort of the special ingredient that takes that custard to a really rich, beautiful place. This is a variation that I love. And whenever I make it, people are like, ooh, what's in that pumpkin pie? So the mascarpone really makes just like such a delicious, creamy version of pumpkin custard. Okay, beautiful. It's all nice and smooth and creamy. Into the crust it goes. I'm gonna transfer the filled pie to a 375 Fahrenheit, 190 Celsius oven and bake until the custard appears set around the outside edges, but is still a touch jiggly in the center. This should take 35 to 40 minutes. Then this pie needs to cool completely at room temperature, and I like to refrigerate it for at least 2 hours and up to 24 hours before serving. We won't brûlée it until right before we're ready to serve. My baked pumpkin pie has had time to cool, so it's time to brûlée it. I'm gonna sprinkle an even layer of granulated sugar over the surface of the pie. Some people say that superfine sugar is even better for this, so if you happen to have it, you can use it. Today I only have regular granulated and it's gonna work just fine. So I'll start by sprinkling an even layer over. Custard pies have a tendency to souffle a little bit in the oven and then sink a little as they cool. That's totally normal. So it may be more difficult to brûlée kind of the edges of the pie, but that's actually in your favor because we also don't necessarily want to torch the pie crust too much. Once I have nice even coverage, it's time to get out our best friend, the kitchen torch. And I'll gently move it back and forth. First, the sugar will melt and then it will begin to caramelize. Keeping your torch in motion is really helpful for this to help it get done nice and even. And it's important to do the brûlée topping just before serving because as it sits, the sugar can start to dissolve and melt with an extended hold time. So this is sort of like that little last minute flair you do to make everybody extra impressed with your pumpkin pie. All right, let's get started on the spiced custard pie. Custard pies like pumpkin and pecan typically dominate the holiday season, but one of my favorites to bring to the table is a classic custard pie flavored generously with fragrant, warm spices. It makes your house smell totally incredible while it's baking and results in a deliciously creamy filling wrapped in a flaky, buttery crust. Baking this pie in a skillet ensures the absolute best version of this delicious textural contrast between a crispy, flaky crust and that super smooth, creamy filling. Let's bake it. In a medium bowl, I'm gonna whisk the eggs and egg yolks to combine. This recipe has a few extra egg yolks in it specifically for richness. It really makes for just a particularly luxurious custard. So 2 extra yolks. I'll whisk those a little bit just to get them broken up. Next, I'm gonna add the granulated sugar. And get ready for it, I'm gonna add some brown sugar. I'll whisk this until it's well combined, about 1 to 2 minutes. Okay, I can tell that the sugar has dissolved a little bit and the eggs are really well mixed, so it's been mixed sufficiently. We can add the next ingredients. I'm gonna add some milk and cream. That's the base of a custard pie. Well, the eggs are really the base, but we get that creaminess and custardiness from milk and cream. Next, I'll add the vanilla, cinnamon, cardamom, which is another of my all-time favorite spices, a little bit of ginger, some cloves. Then I'm gonna add plenty of freshly grated nutmeg, plus a little bit of fine sea salt. And then I'll just whisk everything together to combine. The spices have a tendency to wanna clump up, so really take the time to whisk vigorously so that those spices are well distributed throughout the custard. Okay, everything is well combined. Now we can fill our pie. The one downside of whisking a custard super vigorously is that you end up with lots of visible bubbles in the custard. And we're hoping that our custard pie has a pretty smooth surface. So I've got a little trick for you. First, I'm gonna pour the custard into my cooled par-baked pie crust. And then I've got all these bubbles on the surface. So we bring in our handy dandy friend, the kitchen torch. This is totally optional, but the heat from the torch will pop the bubbles on the surface. So I'm just gonna run it over the surface, just gently, till it pops all those bubbles. Now I'm gonna transfer this to a 350 Fahrenheit, 175 Celsius oven and bake until the crust is deeply golden brown and the custard is set around the outside edges, but still slightly jiggly in the center. This will take about 40 to 45 minutes. Then I need to cool the pie completely at room temperature, and then I like to refrigerate it for at least 2 hours and up to 24 hours before slicing and serving. Into the oven it goes. All right, all my pies have cooled. I think it's time to see if we can pass the sturdy pie challenge. Let's grab the spiced custard. Wow, she popped right out. Yeah. And see, this is one of the best parts about doing the sturdy pie challenge is now we don't have to cut in our beautiful pan and risk scratching it. We can just cut our slice right on the cutting board. She's a beaut! And look at that little jiggle. Okay, let's see about our pumpkin pie. Our pumpkin brulee. Ooh. Just a casual pumpkin pie with a caramelized topping. And the flakage. You could literally hear it when I set it on the cutting board. That's wild. Perfect. Literally perfect. What a beaut. Oh my gosh, I have to taste these pies. I'm gonna start with our cranberry ginger crumb. It's sour, it's spiced perfectly. That kick of the spicy ginger with the tartness of the cranberries. And the whole thing is just so deliciously buttery. That contrast of textures is everything. More people need to cranberry pie, okay? Okay, next the pumpkin brulee. It's so custardy, but it's different than a typical pumpkin pie. It's a little more creamy, and then that caramelized layer on the top adds so much complexity that pairs well with all those spices in the pumpkin pie. And look how flaky the crust. I love that this one is almost like the texture of a double crust pie because we've got the crunchy crust and also that crunchy sugar topping. The spiced custard. That is so delicious, a perfect level of spice. It's like you get the cinnamon notes first, then the warmth of the cardamom, that little bit of ginger. It is really so good, and I also love the color contrast because some of the spices made the surface of the pie more brown, and then as you cut through, you end up getting kind of more of that creamy custard. And all wrapped in that flaky crust. It doesn't get any better than that. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of Happy Baking, and thanks to my friends at STAUB for making this episode possible. Find the recipes for all 3 of these tasty skillet pies linked in the video description below, or you can head to my website, ErinJeanneMcDowell.com. If this video inspires you to bake, please tag me on social media. I love to see what you're making in your kitchens. You can find me at eMcDowell on Instagram, at Erin Jeanne McDowell on TikTok, and as Erin Jeanne McDowell on Facebook. Until next time, wishing you lots of happy pie baking.